from the end of the 20th century into the 21st is that the whole nature of power was changing. And not just in terms that different countries gain or lose power, and not just because there are many types of power other than military power, some of which can do positive things much better than the military. You have hard power, economic power, and what Professor Nye has called a soft power. And it's really the soft power that does most of the positive creation of use of influence. But another thing was happening, and that is the power of governments was being diluted. It was no longer nearly as complete. I suppose it was never absolute complete. But increasingly, what's happening in the world, the power is exercised not only by governments, but by international organizations, by private citizens, by, think of the power of terrorist organizations, the power of organized crime, the power, in many ways, of organized people who are trying to push a given cause. So power is not something that is simply simplified or polarized. And yet, by our actions, then, first of all, the talk of we won the Cold War, and then acting as if, well, Russia is weak now, we don't have to consider their interests. We'll go ahead, and if we have a good reason otherwise, we just do what we need to do, then you really do leave an impression with the Russian people that you are cutting them out of decision-making. And if you are the only superpower and people have a problem, either you're supposed to come and solve it for them, and if you don't, you're probably an enemy. So you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And that has been the position that often the United States and increasingly NATO has almost, you might say, created for itself by this pattern of not paying full attention to the views of others. Now, in this world of diffuse power, and in this world where increasingly the problems, the serious problems we face are international, they are transcendental. What are my grandchildren going to be particularly dealing with? My children are already getting pretty close to retirement age, and that is issues such as the global warming and the deterioration of our environment. Issues such as international crime, the spread of disease, maybe new diseases, corruption, which is increasingly international. Think of the FIFA now, and so on. One could name these serious problems, and not one of them can be solved without very extensive international cooperation. It's not something one government or even one group of people, of governments can take on without having the cooperation of at least the major countries. And I think the recognition of that means, and this is again, I can go back to some of the comments that Senator Fulbright made earlier. But more recently, I think our Professor Joseph Nye has pointed out that effective power today really means integrating your efforts with those of others, finding a common interest, and then working with them for it. And thinking back, that is precisely what we managed to do to end the Cold War. In 1983, I was living a very good and pleasant life as American ambassador in Prague, and I was asked to come to the White House and take a job. And at first I said, no, I don't want to go back to Washington. That bureaucracy is terrible. I'd much rather live here in my palace in Prague. But I was called back, and this was 83, and I was told that President Reagan had decided it was time to deal with the Soviet leaders, and that nobody in the White House then had much experience dealing with them. And they said, it's time to negotiate. Your job will be to develop a negotiating plan. Well, I called Rebecca in Prague and said, I'm afraid we're going to have to go to Washington. I can't turn this one down. The Cold War was at its rhetorical height. What do you do? Well, within a few months, we had President Reagan, because he asked for it, do a new speech sort of dealing with the Soviet Union. And what we did there, or with his guidance, was to put every problem we had in terms of to cooperate for an end that was to the benefit of both countries. I think that speech, which he delivered in January 1984, a little over a year before Gorbachev became General Secretary.